Okay, so today we're going to start with where we left off on chapter 2. So let me bring that up and let's go to slideshow. And we should be starting with economic systems. Okay, so what we did last week was chapters 1 and 2. And we finished up with the production possibilities curve or frontier for both China and for India. And we found that they violated, in each case, the production possibilities frontier, and in so doing, created massive problems for their own economies. In the case of China, Mao thought he could continue to produce wheat and shift the population and the growth into the steel industry. But as he found out, in the end, it cost him tremendously in terms of the famine in China, and a lot of people died in China. And what he did was he didn't recognize the fact that you can't do everything without investing in technology. In the case of India, Nehru thought that he could modify the entire economy and they could build their economy from within. Unfortunately, his problem was in defining what he did. He actually reduced the production possibilities curve or frontier and shrunk the size of his economy and pushed it back into a more feudal type of economy. Small business, no, no innovation, no investment, and as a result, no growth. So let's move on to economic systems. Now, let's talk next about the market system. Hang on a second. I guess I don't lecture well sitting down. I get this frog in my throat. Anyway, market systems. The system we have in the United States is known as capitalism or a mixed economy. Our government plays a limited role. It's decentralized. The federal government in Washington, D.C. is decentralized from the states. The states also have their own governments and pass their own regulations. So we've got a decentralized type of system, and the marketplace is allowed to function pretty much in a free manner. So the key to this system, however, is private ownership. Without this, we would not be able to reap the fruits of our labor. It would not encourage innovation, it would discourage innovation. If you can't produce something and reap the benefits of what you produce and the risks you take, you're not going to take those risks. You're not going to do that innovation to begin with. So key to the market system or capitalism is private ownership. We have to be able to control or have what we own and reap the benefits or losses from it. Government does not play a dominant role in the economy. The US government is here to help us. That's their role. They set down the rule of law and they say, this is the rules under which you will follow. We're not going to tell you what to produce. We're not going to tell you who to sell it to, but we want you to be able to do it in a legal, protected manner. So the founding fathers figured all this out. Very smart. They all came from a system in which there was at least a king or a queen, and they wanted to be sure that we didn't have any kings or queens in the United States. So they set up the three branches of government: executive, which of course is the president; judicial, which of course is the Supreme Court; and congressional, which are the branches of the government, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The states pretty much followed this method of structure. And in addition, when they set this up, they all had different states: New York, Philadelphia, our city is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Virginia. Okay, and they all said, you know what, we need a central government because we have these common borders, we have this ocean, we have these rivers. We need a central government to tell us how to operate these as a group. We can't do it ourselves. So capitalism. Capitalism then is key, again, as we said, private property. An individual can own the land, he can own the business, He can reap the benefits from his efforts. He can also suffer losses, which you do see, particularly in case of, let's say, Radio Shack. The other piece of the law and the system is that a corporation is a legal person. Later in the course, we'll go through some of the different types of organizations that are engaged in business. But remember, a corporation is a legal person. It can own property, it can make contracts, it can produce products. It is, in effect, like a person under the eyes of the law. All right, owning property. Good test question. Owning property encourages two things: innovation and risk taking. If you don't own the property in which you are taking the risks or providing innovation to make something different or make something better, then you're not going to do it in the first place. That's one of the reasons the system has worked and a control or command system has not. There's no incentive at the individual level to take a risk, provide information, innovation, to try to do the job better and to get the gain as a result of doing the job better. So it's kind of a disincentive not to be in a capitalism type system. So you personally, you may not be the entrepreneur, you may not put a business together, you may not be the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, but you know what? You are an entrepreneur. You make decisions, you make economic decisions. You may not own a house, but you have an apartment. With that apartment, you have a leasehold, and therefore you have an ownership in that leasehold. The owner cannot take it away from you, all right? And you can, if he does or tries, you can sue him in court. So we may not own our house, but we make economic decisions. Property rights also are key to intellectual property. If you look at property intellectually, you've got two kinds. You've got a patent. Let's say you invent a new product. You think you can market that product, so you develop some prototypes, you draw diagrams, you cut out some drawings, you take it to the patent office, and the patent says, yeah, it looks like a good thing, haven't seen anything like it before, let's issue you a temporary patent until it becomes a full-fledged patent. So this patents more or less apply to intellectual property that are designs or physical products. Copyright law on the opposite side pertain to written or intellectual property. Your textbook is copyrighted. So copyrights pertain to basically the types of products that they may be competition, but you are protected by law under your intellectual property or copyright law. All right, other characteristics of market system: active but limited government. Therefore, we have one, freedom of enterprise and choice. We have the ability to start and develop a business and make it successful and get the results or the benefits from that success. We're driven by self-interest. There is nothing wrong with self-interest. We want to succeed. Okay, that's the basic fundamental right of every American. We're driven by self-interest. We compete. You guys are competing with one another with grades. Who gets a better grade? Who gets a scholarship in college, etc. So self-interest and competition are good things. They're not bad things. They're not bad words. Okay, markets. There are two different kinds of markets. There are physical markets, which is your local donut shop, your Target, your Walmart, your dry cleaners down the street, etc. Those are physical markets because you walk in and you talk to someone, you select a product off the shelf, you go to the cashier and you buy it. Now, there's also now the biggest part and growing fastest market is the internet. The growth of Amazon has been phenomenal. And what people do today is, to a large extent, they do what's called showrooming. Showrooming is going to, let's say I want to buy a new computer. So I go down to Best Buy. I look around at all the computers. I touch and feel. I try them. I do. And I decide, you know, I really like this one. But instead of buying it at the store that I'm in, I go home, purchase the product cheaper, hopefully on the internet. If it's not cheaper, you wouldn't do it. You would go back to the store and buy it where you looked at it in the first place. Technology and capital goods are key to the market system. If we want to expand the production possibilities curve, we need technology. And technology means that we're going to buy additional capital goods to produce products, not only in greater quantity, but also at lower cost. Remember, the low-cost producer is the one who wins. Specialization, one of the keys that wasn't in existence in what Nehru did to India, was the ability to specialize. Use people to do things they do the best. Okay? That's specialization. It's a division of labor. We take people, we train them in the things that they can do best, and they specialize in those things, and for that, we pay them. And in many cases, we pay them very well. Money is key. We have to have money in order to create and engage in financial transactions. You have to have money to buy something. So money is key to all these transactions that take place in the economy, day in, day out, 365 days a year, 24/7. Money facilitates all our transactions. Now, the key with money in the US is that it's not backed by gold any longer or silver or anything else. It's full faith and credit of the United States. And the fact that it is full faith and credit of the United States, it's accepted by everyone as what they call legal tender. Socialism. There's a little cartoon shows a little bit about socialism. Guy walks up to a buddy and he says, "Spare change, mister? I need to get a cup of coffee." Guy says, "Sure," and reaches into his neighbor's pocket, takes the money out and gives it to the beggar. Key to socialism is redistribution of wealth. It's considered to be more political than economic, but it is kind of quasi, both political and economic. It's a concept of wealth distribution, and the purpose behind it is to eliminate the disparities between the wealthy and the poor. The whole idea is that, and again, if you look at our tax system we have in the US, we have a progressive tax system, which basically means the more you make, the more you pay. We use that tax system to kind of redistribute wealth. We take from the rich, the more you make, the more you pay, and we give to the poor, food stamps, etc. Okay? And also the programs that we developed during the recession, during the Depression, which primarily resulted in unemployment insurance. If you're at a job for a while, you can apply for unemployment insurance and pick up a check. All right, in Europe, this became popular after World War II. The European economies wanted to rebuild. They were devastated, Germany, France, etc. And so they wanted to rebuild their countries, and they wanted to do it in such a way that they got the will and the benefit of the people to help them rebuild. The biggest concern was Soviet Russia, the fact that the countries that they conquered during the war, like Poland, remained in the Soviet sphere. So the biggest concern was they didn't want the Soviets to take over the rest of Europe. So the European countries made some compromises. They kept the big industries. They kept telephone, telegraph, post office, railroads, transportation of all kinds. And these things were held by the government as assets of the government. At the same time, they set down some pretty strict laws for individuals and workers. So in the terms of macroeconomic issues, in many countries, the industries that were big, like rail, utilities, as we said, were owned by the government. But at the same time, they put in very strict labor laws, mandatory vacations, severance pay, work week limitations. For instance, the work week in Europe was 30 hours, not 40. In many cases, they would close all the businesses on Monday and everybody would go away. One of the main areas of vacations is the month of August. It's very difficult to get things done in August in Europe. And they had very strict rules on severance pay. I remember when I worked for Burroughs years ago, we had a plant producing disk files in Ireland. We set up that plant, and then disk file production kind of trailed off. They became less and less popular and required as microchips got smaller and smaller. So the disk file factory had to be closed. When we closed it, we had to pay every worker in that factory 1 year's income. Very tough thing to do. Here's an example, a little cartoon of a socialist. They decide to make a slogan, capitalism sucks. They register as a trademark to protect it. They print it on t-shirts, caps, mugs, bags, stickers, sold 4 million items each in 24 countries and made 15 million bucks. So the socialist becomes a capitalist. Now, in a market system, there are 5 fundamental questions that have to be answered. So let's look at the 5 questions that the market system answers through the system by itself without government intervention. First, what products will be produced in our system? Well, the goods and services that will be produced at a profit. Businesses cannot afford to produce products that they can't sell. So if they can't sell it, they discontinue it and produce a product that will sell, that they can make a profit on. So the profit motive is what drives what products will be produced. Now, how do we determine that? Very simple. Take all sales, which is total revenue of a business, less the product cost, salaries, wages, interest, any special land, labor, capital, and subtract the two, and we end up with a profit. So this determines what the firm will produce. Now, we share in this decision. We are the buyers. And as buyers of these products, we have what's called dollar votes. Those votes mean this is what you're going to produce. This is what we want. We want you to produce this. That whole concept is called consumer sovereignty. So in a market system, the consumer is sovereign. He doesn't buy, producer doesn't produce. Second question. How will the goods and services be produced? Production will be based on the least cost method. Now, make no mistake about it. I've said it a couple of times. I'll say it again and again. Least cost, lowest cost producer is the one who wins. He wins the marketplace. People aren't going to buy things just because they like a high price. So get the cost down as low as you can, take it to market, reasonable profit, and you will be successful. So production is done by combining the resources that the entrepreneur has accumulated, capital, labor, the plant he produces it in, and he puts those in combinations that will produce for him the lowest cost product, hopefully lower than his competitors, and therefore he has a dominant place in the market. The dominant factors determining the least cost method are technology. If you have a business and you are not in a position to take advantage of technological improvements, then you will fall by the wayside because your competitors will pick up that technology difference, invest in technology, and use that technology to drive their costs down lower than yours. So one of the things you have to be careful of when you finish college and you're in business is that you are not afraid to adopt technology. I had a boss once, CEO, that thought it was absolutely stupid for people in a business to have a computer on their desk. Well, obviously he didn't know what he was talking about. Question number 3, who gets the output? Those who can afford to buy it. Again, the ability to pay. Who's going to buy the Mercedes? The guy that can afford it. Who's going to buy the Ford? Probably the guy that can't afford the Mercedes. He may really want a Mercedes, but he can only afford a Ford because that is what he has the ability to pay for. So it all depends on the amount of income that we have. And what we're talking about here is income after taxes are taken out of our paycheck. In other words, we're talking about disposable income. Disposable income determines what we're going to buy, how much we're going to buy, how much we're going to spend, how much we're going to put in savings. We'll talk about savings later on. Okay, the other part of who will get the output is the price. We're not going to spend money We think of the margin. Remember the example of chocolate chip cookies. I want to buy a box of chocolate chip cookies. It's $2. All of a sudden, I go to the store a week later, they raise the price to $2.50. I'm thinking at the margin. The margin is that 50% or that 50-cent increase in the price of my chocolate chip cookies. So there's no way, because I think at the margin, there's no way I'm going to make that price. I'm going to shop around and see if I can find the price I used to pay. Preference. This is key in what we do and what we buy. Preference determines whether we're going to buy the product or not. I mentioned here consumer preference and indifference curves. We'll talk about that later in the course. If we get a chance, I'll draw it on the board and show you how it operates. But later on in the course, we're going to spend some time on consumer preference and indifference curves. But for now, our preference determines whether we're going to buy one product over another. If we prefer the Mercedes, we're willing to take the financial risk to buy the Mercedes. That's exactly what we do. And we have that choice. Remember, this is all based on choice. We have the choice. Nobody, no government is telling us what to buy. We're making the choice ourselves. All right, so the key is demand for the product. In chapter 4, we're going to talk about demand and supply. The demand for the product is our want, whether we want it or not. That determines demand. We'll spend a lot of time on demand in chapter 4. Question number 4. How will the system accommodate change? Change is critical. Without government intervention, the market will force its own change. In other words, again, back to my chocolate chip cookies. If, for instance, at the margin, the price goes up from $2 to $2.50, I may say, the heck with you, chocolate chip cookies, I'm going to go buy some other cookie because you're too darn expensive. So that is all taking place in the marketplace. The producer has raised his price. Me, the consumer, has said, not going to pay it. Too bad. Your problem, not mine. All right, consumer preferences will drive demand, the desire for a product and the price. Again, going back to our example, I do want chocolate chip cookies, but I have the ability to choose something else which is almost as good. Chocolate chip cookies versus sugar cookies. Okay? And it's all based on desire. It's not worth the additional 50 cents. So the impact of consumer preferences determines what we will buy, and therefore it determines the profitability of the corporation and the continuing production of that product. We're going to talk in class about bell curves. The example I use when I talk about bell curves is Apple. Apple started out with the iPod, okay, very successful. The curve was starting to come down. They saw the end coming. They were working on developing an iPhone. They came out with the iPhone 4. They saw that was going to trail down. They came out with the 5. That was trailing down. They came out with the 6. And each of these successive products have kept the revenue stream and the sales going up and up for Apple. Okay, that's how companies maintain and continue production, by being innovative, by investing in technology, by not being afraid of change. Don't be afraid of change. Change is going to come whether you like it or not. Number 5, how does the system promote progress? We need to move that frontier. We need to move that production possibilities curve in order to progress. So, technological advance. I can't talk about technology at too much, okay? So, product fails to appeal, they have to either drop the price and take a loss or less profit, or they have to come up with something that we want. Remember, we are the consumer. We have the consumer sovereignty based on the dollars that we spend for a product. Now, the manufacturer, he can go out of business or innovate. That's his choice. Okay? Remember, business either has a choice. It can go out of business or it can innovate. Going out of business is very difficult. Bankruptcy is very difficult, very expensive. For instance, in the case of Radio Shack, if you bought Radio Shack stock at its peak, you paid $64 for it. The Friday before it went bankrupt, you could have sold it for 20 cents. So if you held on to your stock, you lost quite a bit of money. All right, now one of the things that companies and firms have to do is to make sure that they understand that nothing lasts forever. If you have a successful product and it is successful, what you are going to do is create your own competition. Somebody's going to look at this and say, hey, that guy's doing great, he's making money, let's compete with him. Let's see if we can produce a product that's exactly the same or similar, but with a lower cost. So remember always, nothing lasts forever. It's going to change. It may be bad, it may be lousy, it may be good, whatever, it is going to change because nothing lasts forever. Excuse me. Okay, let's recap what we've been talking about here. Pure capitalism, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, does not exist anywhere today. So remember that. It was a great idea. Goes right back to a farming community, agrarian economy, but it doesn't exist anywhere today. The market system, pretty much capitalism today. A varying role, limited government, but be careful. Don't confuse the technology of the term, rather the economic term, capitalism, with democracy. They are two different things. Don't relate command economy to communism and say a command economy is communism. Could or could not be. Same thing with socialism. Socialism is the only one that kind of mixes the two together. Command system. Government owns basically all the property. They make all economic decisions. Tell people what to buy, tell people what to build, tell people what they have to do, and in result, in the terms of the market system, the government ends up buying all the product that people produce, particularly in the case of collective farms. Nobody can own property, and therefore you don't want to innovate in this system. All innovation comes from the central committee or the central government. It's not left to the individual, it's left specifically to the government. Okay, let's move into chapter 3 now. In chapter 3, we're going to use the Production Possibilities Frontier to relate it to trade between countries. Now, independence between trade and trade between countries is a subject that we're going to take up later in another chapter. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on chapter 3. I want to move into chapter 4. So let's do chapter 3. Let me give you some idea of what we're talking about in terms of international trade and the production possibilities curve or frontier and how it affects international trade. We use the production possibilities curve, and it shows us what products a given country can produce at the lowest possible cost. Now, the country that produces a low-cost product will probably be what? Will it be the exporter or the importer? If you're the low-cost country, you're going to be the exporter. If you have a high cost of that very same product, you're probably better off importing from another country. And that's where the whole concept of free trade comes in. So the curve tells us what products to produce, where we have the advantage, and what that advantage is. Now, in some cases, there are countries that have absolute advantage in certain products. You can think of Saudi Arabia in terms of gold. But oil. Saudi Arabian oil, for the longest period of time, was the dominant factor in oil production in the world. You can think about diamonds. Diamonds come from South Africa. De Beers controls pretty much the diamond market, right? Now, in terms of comparative advantage or the advantage of one product over another, be sure you understand the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Comparative advantage means there are other products to compete with you, and therefore your advantage is you are the lowest cost producer of a same or similar product. Absolute advantage means you have complete control over the marketplace and there is no real competition. Again, go back to diamonds and South Africa. So comparative advantage, what do we mean? The concept was developed by David Ricardo. He was operating about the same time Adam Smith was. And he said that, the cost of the product is going to be key to international trade. So what he's talking about here is the ability to produce a good at the lowest possible opportunity cost. Remember the curve of movement along the curve of the production possibilities curve. We have to give up something to produce more of something else. And that's what David Ricardo came up with. The lowest opportunity cost is going to win. The producer with the lowest opportunity cost, I can't say it enough, will win. So the basis for trade around the world is called comparative advantage. Compared to other countries, I have a comparative advantage, lowest opportunity cost in this product, and therefore in the world market, I can export this product and make a profit, even if other countries put a tariff on it, because I am the low-cost producer. The growth of trade between 1950 and today has been phenomenal. In the 50s, world trade was probably about 7%, maybe 5% of world GDP, world growth, world value. Today, it's closer to 30%. The result has been the growth of a concept called globalization. The world has gotten very small. All this has occurred since World War II. We found places because of the war that we didn't know existed. And when the war ended, we decided we would have to start to trade with these countries and bring them into the family of nations. Comparative advantage. Here's an example of comparative advantage between the US and Canada. Two products we're going to compare are pork and airplanes. If you look at the graph on the left, this is the production possibility frontier for the US. And on that frontier, we can consume without any trade 1,000 for 1,000 aircraft as opposed to 1 million pork bellies. Okay, that's our consumption level. If we start to import from Canada, we can increase our consumption of airplanes from 1,000 to 1,500, and of course we can sell more pork. Now, US production, if it was all only pork, we would be the dominant person, 3 units. Now, if we relate the same chart over to Canada, Canada production is production, you can look at the dot 3,000 units in quantity of aircraft, but only 1.5 million tons of pork. So the comparative advantage, the bottom axis, we can produce 3 million tons of pork, and Canada can produce only 1.5 million tons. We can produce 1,000 airplanes without trade. Canada, without trade, can produce 3,000. So it makes sense that between the US and Canada, we should provide Canada with pork, and they should provide us with more airplanes. Okay? Very simple example. We can talk about that in class if you have some other comments or questions about it. All right, I said it all resulted in globalization. Again, as I mentioned, world trade has grown from 7% of world GDP to 30% today. Free trade has resulted in what's called globalization. Globalization means that countries are trading amongst one another based on what products they produce at the lowest possible cost. Nations engage in increased trade based on free trade. And the free trade, exists between both developed and undeveloped countries. It all depends on the product you had the comparative advantage in. Okay, now, is globalization good or bad? A lot of people say it's bad because what happens is the rich countries get richer and the poor countries get poorer. So let's look at that a little further. Here's some of the concerns that people have about globalization. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's here. So, but let's talk about some of the concerns. One of them is diminishing the role of the nation state. If I have to rely on another country for a product I need to import into my country, then that person or that company or that country may have a dominant role in what happens in my nation. So they're very concerned that it's going to have the effect of taking away our ability to be self-determined. In other words, our own government can make its decisions based on itself and its own government itself and its own products that it produces. But if they have to import stuff, they may have other nations dictating something to them. The other concern is social dumping. Social dumping means whatever, let's assume United States, Europe, okay? We are big entertainers. We like our friends in Hollywood, for instance, Hollywood as I call it. People don't necessarily want the ethics and the concepts that come out of Hollywood introduced into their economies. So they don't want the social system that we have in this country in their own countries. It's called social dumping. One of the concerns a lot of people had in the case of China and its development was that they would adopt our system through social dumping, Hollywood, for instance, but it hasn't happened. The next is the gulf between rich and poor. Again, as I said in that cartoon or showed you, there's a lot of concern that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Next, not non-controllable multis. Now, this is kind of interesting. This is your General Motors or your, better still, General Electric company building products in, for instance, India. They're going to build washing machines and dryers in India for the Indian market. Now, when they do that, does that mean they have control over what happens in India, both from an economic and a political point of view? It's a big concern for some of these countries because if they produce and are very successful in a foreign country, they may be in a position to dictate based on that success and that development and that value, they may be able to dictate terms to the government. It's a concern. And lastly, environmental destruction. I'll show you this in China. China's developed economically, but they haven't been able to, at the same time, invest in controlling their environment. They're a low-cost producer, but again, they don't have a social security system. They don't have a retirement plan. They don't have health care, etc. So their cost of production is a lot lower than ours. And as a result, the Chinese people tend to save more money, up to 40% of their income, where we are lucky to save 5% of our income. Okay, globalization and technology. Communication and transportation costs, along with the development of technology products, grew like crazy from 1950 to 2005. And this really helped the globalization and the trade around the world. One of them was containerization. Doesn't seem like a technology, but in fact it is. You can put your goods and service or goods into a container in China, put it on a ship, a huge ship, transport it to a West Coast port in the United States, unload it in that port. If you want to develop, sell it locally, it goes on a truck and is distributed locally. If you want to do it long distance, like ship it to New York, it goes on a train. The container is never unloaded until it gets to the final end user. So in addition to that, we have the telephone, the fax, and the internet. Doing business internationally used to be very difficult from a financial point of view. When I worked for a company, what we were doing, we were starting to produce stuffed circuit boards over in Taiwan. Before we could send a product to Taiwan, we had to have a letter of credit purchasing that product from us by the company in Taiwan. That letter of credit had to be deposited in our bank in the US, and that whole process took a lot of time. We had to wait for the letter of credit before we could actually ship product over to Taiwan. Okay, The other part of this whole thing is, as a result of globalization, we are doing more things with more sub-assemblies than we used to. For instance, this is an airplane that's produced in Canada. I believe the Canadian company's name is Bombardier. So parts of the airplane come from 5 different regions. Canadians do the fuselage, the stabilizer, the landing gear, and the final assembly. Japan provides the wings and another part of the fuselage. The United Kingdom gets another part of the fuselage and stabilizers. The European Union gives them the power plant, probably a Rolls-Royce, the fuel systems, and the environmental systems inside the cabin. The US, we are the leaders in avionics, which is control of the plane, the radar, etc. And if you look at that, it takes 4 or 5 different entities to produce a single plane in Canada. This is the result of globalization. This is what globalization means. We're buying products from those who can produce it the best and the cheapest. Containerization, as I said, was a big one. This is an example of containerization by sea. Okay, so one of the things that happens, though, is we've got to be careful because sometimes we put up trade barriers and we put up export subsidies because we don't want products from other countries. They don't want the competition in their own country. So what do? They do tariffs. Tariffs come in many different forms. One of them is a revenue tariff. This is where the product is taxed as it comes into the country, consumed domestically. But what happens is that the government makes money on every import of that product. The example is coffee, for instance. Now, their other is a protective tariff, secondly. Now, what this has done is it's used to protect domestic producers. Let's assume, for instance, automobile tires. They can produce them cheaper in China or Taiwan than we can here, or Japan, or South Korea. So we want to protect Goodyear. We want to protect our own companies. So what we put up is a protective tariff, and we say, if you want to bring your, what is the Korean tire company, Hankook, you want to bring your Hankook tires into the U.S., you're going to pay a tariff to import them into the U.S. because we want to protect our own industries. Thirdly, import quotas. This is an interesting one because what happens is we tell the country of origin, shipping product into us at a lower cost, and we tell them, you know what? You can ship into us 10,000 units. We'll accept them. We're not going to put a tariff on them. But once you exceed 10,000 units, the 10,000th one unit will be taxed as a tariff. So you're good up to a certain point, but beyond that point, we're going to charge you. And then non-tariff barriers, like we saw in the case of India, the license Raj. They put in licensing requirements, and the licensing requirements are very strict, and they're very difficult to get. And in some cases, they have onerous quality standards to bring products into their country, which makes it very difficult to do exports into a country. And then there are some things called voluntary export restrictions, which have the same effect as quotas. And lastly, export subsidies. This is a situation where the government subsidizes the production of a product within their country to enable their country and their businesses to compete in the world market. So what they do is they issue a subsidy to the company, and they say, you can use this to help maintain your profit. And what we want you to do is to reduce your cost and also your price so that you are pricing into the world market at a price that is below the world market. And we're going to help you do that. Okay. Kind of unfair competition and not very palatable to other countries. All right. International trade and comparative advantage. So the country, as we said, as I showed you the case of pork bellies or pork and airplanes, the one that produces the most at the lowest possible cost is the one that has the most favorable position and the highest chance of selling that in the world market. So comparative advantage is the basis of all international trade. So comparative advantage means that we're going to trade with one another because it makes sense. And it may be a case where we import from one country and don't tariff it, but they in turn take our exports and don't tariff those. It's a quid pro quo kind of situation. We all agree to it. One of the things that you're going to hear a lot about in the news is, and it's already started, the renegotiation of NAFTA, which is the trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And NAFTA is being renegotiated because there are some things that are considered by us to be unfair. We have a trade imbalance with both of those countries because of NAFTA. And all you have to do is look at the country's labor rates. The labor rate in Mexico, for instance, they have a huge advantage in labor rates. If you look at corporate taxes in Canada, they have an advantage in corporate taxes. So these things should have been taken into consideration when negotiating the NAFTA agreement. It's up for renegotiation now under the current administration. All right, so what does free trade mean? It's the absence of tariffs. There are no taxes on imports. And if you have tariffs on imports, it distorts the basis for comparative advantage. So unfair trade leads to the most important thing: retaliation. You have to be very careful in negotiating between nations. If you decide that you're going to slap a tariff on their product, you run the risk of them retaliating against you. Okay? Very, very important concept. You can hurt yourself by trying to help yourself. If you do a tariff on a foreign country, on a foreign country's imports into your country, you can expect to have retaliation. Okay, so that finishes out chapter 3. As I said, we're going to spend more time on comparative advantage later on in the course. So let's move on to chapter 4 and start supply and demand. I'll finish this in class. I want to do most of it in class, but let's get started on it. Okay, so the market forces of supply and demand. We talked about a competitive market, and a competitive market has within it the forces of supply and demand that determine what we call equilibrium prices. Okay, groups of markets. Markets. Market is a group of buyers and sellers operating in the marketplace. Now, a market can be faceless or visible. We talked about it earlier. A faceless market is one in which you don't see the person you're buying the product from. A visible market is a market where you do see the person you're buying it from. For instance, a visible market: Best Buy, Costco, Walmart, Target, your local grocery store, your cleaners, your donut shop, your restaurant, etc. Those are visible markets. Faceless: the internet, Amazon, stock and bond markets. Be very careful. Stock and bond markets do not represent buying and selling necessarily, and they are not investment in businesses. We're going to talk about that later on. Okay, competitive market. There are many buyers and sellers in a competitive market. Okay? It's not just dominated by one seller, like a monopoly. And there is more than one buyer. The more buyers and the more sellers, the more competitive the marketplace tends to be. Probably the most competitive marketplace is for food products in your local supermarket. Now, the key that I don't ever want you to forget: all markets have 4 things in common: demand, supply, price, and quantity. 4 things in common. Every single market: demand, supply, price, and quantity. You have to have those 4 things. So how do we determine what the price is going to be? Well, it's based on what we agree with the seller. Remember, we're the consumer. The seller is the producer. So even though you go to a grocery store, you pick up your chocolate chip cookies off the shelf, for $2, and you decide that that's what you're going to buy. Now, even though you haven't negotiated with anybody in the grocery store, you see the label that says what the price is, and you have agreed to pay that price by picking it up off the shelf, going to the cashier, and paying for it. Now, that is the interaction of buyers and sellers, even though you never saw the seller. Okay, you, the buyer, have done your doing. You've done what you needed to do. You cast your vote in dollars, consumer sovereignty, by buying that product. Never met with the seller, but you accepted the price on the shelf, and that is a negotiation. So what's demand? Again, we're going to spend more time on this, but it's a schedule or curve, and it depicts the various amounts a consumer will purchase over a product over a period of time. So all other things being equal, of course, ceteris paribus. So what it says is that if the price of a product goes up, I'm not going to buy as much. If the price of a product goes down, I might buy more. So the law of demand says that if the price of a product rises, I'm not going to buy as much. If it falls, I might be inclined to buy more. This is called an inverse relationship between price and quantity. Okay, let me say it again. The price goes up, I'm going to buy less. The price goes down, I'm going to buy more. Okay? The theory behind the law of demand is that we're not going to pay more than we have to. Again, the example I used of the chocolate chip cookies. The seller decides to raise the price from $2 to $2.50. I think of the margin. I don't like to pay 50% more, 50 cents more, and that makes me mad. So I'm not going to buy his stupid product because he raised the price and he thinks he can get more money from me. We're seeing that today in this gas crisis we have with the hurricane that hit Houston. There are some gas stations that are gouging prices. You may see a price of, for regular, you may see a price of $2.30 now. Right down the street, you may see a price of $2.90, almost $3 for a gallon of gas. So this is supply and demand. And what you're going to do is, if you've got enough gas in your tank, you're going to go find the lowest price in the area for gasoline. You're not going to buy that high price because you're thinking at the margin. You're not trying to waste money. You want to save money. So the law of demand says price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Price goes down, quantity demanded probably will go up. So what we say is the relationship between price and quantity on the demand curve is inverse. So the inverse relationship between price and quantity says common sense. Again, my chocolate chip cookies example, you're probably going to be sick of hearing about chocolate chip cookies. But again, the lower the price, the more I'm willing to pay for it, and the more I'm willing to buy. The higher the price, the less I'm going to buy. And it's common sense. We all think this way, unconsciously probably, but this is the way we think. We're not in the business of wasting money. Money is important to us. We're not in the business of wasting it. So this leads us to the law of diminishing marginal utility. This is the concept that means that if I buy something and I acquire it and I use it, my utility, the utility value of that product has been satisfied. First box of chocolate chip cookies I buy and eat gives me more satisfaction than the next box I buy right after that and go to eat those, even though I may get a lower price. Grocery stores know this. We talked about this earlier. How do they get around it? Get two for the price of one. So the law of diminishing marginal utility means we're not getting as much satisfaction from the second product that we buy. We're satisfied up to a point. Beyond that point of satisfaction, the law of diminishing marginal utility takes hold. So the inverse relationship. Income effect. The lower the prices, the more we have to spend on the product. and we have to spend on other products. Okay, we don't just buy one product, we buy multiple products. So as a result, we're trying to make sure that we don't waste money. We don't like to waste money. We don't have money to burn. We're very careful. So again, income effect, cheaper the price, the more I can buy. Substitution effect, assuming a fixed income, let's assume that the price of steak goes up too high. We don't like that price. What do? We'll substitute chicken. Right? There may be a direct substitution between steak and chicken. So that if we're happy with the price of steak, we stay with it. If we're not happy with it, we will substitute it for chicken. Now, in the world scheme of things, what's going to happen to the price of steak when we make that substitution? And what's going to happen to the price of chicken when we make that substitution? Well, it's kind of obvious. The price of the steak is going to start to decline. The price of chicken is going to start to increase. Why? Because of the demand curve. We're buying more and more chicken, so the price is going to go up. We're buying less and less chicken, so the price is going to go down. The consumer, the producer is going to have to do that. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. We'll go into graphs in class. So that's it for today, and thank you very much. Have a great day, and I'll see you, I guess, on Thursday.